The bazaar was alive with a chaos that could only be described as galactic poetry in motion. Beneath the blazing twin suns of Threxon 4, a sprawling marketplace sprawled like a living organism, pulsating with the vibrant colors, smells, and sounds of 1,000 star systems. Booths selling everything from glowing starfruit to tiny black holes, advertised as pocket-sized singularities for the on-the-go adventurer, stretched in endless rows, with hawkers shouting over one another in an unintelligible cacophony. Gideon Wren ambled through the chaos with the purposeful gait of a man whose purpose had long since evaporated. His boots scuffed against the dusty ground, and his faded flight jacket flapped open in the warm breeze, revealing a shirt that might once have been white in a kinder, less stain-filled era. In one hand, he clutched the kind of steaming beverage that was a universal constant in the galaxy, barely drinkable but somehow comforting. Fresh hyperkelp, it slices, dices, and recalibrates your neural pathways, a vendor hollered, waving something green and alarmingly alive. Gideon raised an eyebrow and kept walking, sipping his drink. Should have stayed on the ship, he muttered to himself, though the soft hum in his ear reminded him he wasn't truly alone. Correction. The voice of his ship's AI, MORV, chimed in. You should have stayed on the ship and fixed the coolant system, but instead you're here, shopping. For what exactly? Another collection of dubious life choices? Gideon took another sip and smirked. You wouldn't understand, MORV. You're a machine. This, he gestured vaguely to the bustling market, is what humans call living. Living looks suspiciously like procrastination, MORV deadpanned. But please, don't let me stop you from acquiring yet another piece of junk to clutter my cargo hold. Gideon ignored the snark, as he often did, and wandered deeper into the bazaar. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He rarely was. But he enjoyed the act of looking. The endless parade of alien life forms, the bizarre wares, the occasional need to duck a rogue projectile or a drunken trader. It all felt like a reminder of how vast and ridiculous the galaxy was. That's when he saw her. She was standing at a stall, her back to him, but even from this angle there was something arresting about her. Her skin shimmered faintly, a soft glow that shifted hues, like an aurora contained beneath her surface. Her hair, or what passed for it, floated weightlessly as though it had never heard of gravity. She was bargaining with the vendor in a melodic language that Gideon couldn't place, her voice carrying over the din like a song that knew it didn't belong in this chaos. And then she turned, just as Gideon reached for a piece of fruit from a neighboring stall. Their eyes met, or at least, he thought they did. Her irises were a swirling, opalescent storm, and for a moment, he felt like he was staring into the heart of a nebula. Gideon, ever the eloquent wordsmith, promptly dropped the fruit. The stall's anti-grav field failed spectacularly, sending a cascade of glowing orange orbs tumbling to the ground. One bounced directly into the face of a passing vendor, who shouted a curse in a language that sounded like a broken synthesizer. Smooth, MORV whispered in his ear. The woman's lips curved into a smile, a small, amused thing that somehow made the chaos around them seem quieter. She knelt to pick up one of the fallen fruits, and as she handed it to him, their fingers brushed. Her skin was warm, almost electric, and Gideon felt a jolt that wasn't entirely unpleasant. You dropped this, she said, her voice carrying a lilting accent he couldn't place. Thanks, he managed, his brain still catching up. Sorry about the fruit situation. I'm usually more coordinated, except when I'm not. Her smile widened, and for a moment, he thought she might actually laugh. But then her expression shifted, her glow dimming slightly as she glanced over his shoulder. Gideon turned just in time to see a group of figures approaching, their dark armor catching the sunlight in sharp, menacing glints. The woman stepped back, her earlier amusement replaced by tension. I have to go, she said quickly. Wait. Gideon started, but she was already moving, slipping into the crowd with a grace that made her seem almost untouchable. The figures in armor followed, their movements efficient and predatory. Gideon watched them disappear into the throng, his gut twisting with a strange mix of curiosity and concern. "Well," Morv said after a beat, "that wasn't ominous at all." Gideon hesitated for only a moment before tossing a handful of credits at the fruit vendor. "Keep the change," he called, grabbing one of the glowing fruits as he jogged after the woman. "Of course you're following her," Morv sighed. "Why wouldn't you? It's not like we have important things to do, like survive." "A hunch," Morv echoed dryly. "Or a crush. Statistically, they're equally ill-advised." Gideon ignored the AI and pressed on. He didn't know why he was following her or what he hoped to find. All he knew was that in a galaxy filled with chaos, she was the first thing that had made him feel alive. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he wasn't ready to let her slip away. Gideon sat in the dim cockpit of the nebulous mule, nursing a drink that tasted suspiciously like engine degreaser. The view through the wide front window was a patchwork of starlight, but his attention wasn't on the stars. It was on her, the alien woman he couldn't shake from his thoughts. It had been 3 days since the bazaar, 3 days since she disappeared into the crowd with a flash of glowing skin and a flurry of armored pursuers. And yet, her face lingered in his mind, like a song he couldn't stop humming. "You've been staring at that navigation console for hours," Morv said, breaking the silence. The AI's voice was sharp and wry, the auditory equivalent of an arched eyebrow. "Are you trying to hack into it with the power of longing?" Gideon leaned back in his seat and sighed. "I'm thinking." "Thinking," Morv repeated. "That's new. Should I alert the Galactic Council?" "You're hilarious," Gideon shot back. He tilted his head to glare at the console, where Morv's voice emanated. "And for your information, I'm thinking about what to do next." "I have a suggestion," the AI said. "How about fixing the coolant system before we all suffocate? Just a thought." But Gideon wasn't listening. He was busy replaying every detail of their brief encounter. Her voice, her laugh, the way her glow dimmed when those mercenaries appeared. It all felt like a puzzle he was desperate to solve. "Do you think it's possible to meet someone and just know?" he asked aloud. There was a pause before Morv responded, and when it did, its tone was drenched in mockery. "Know what? That you're hopelessly smitten, or that you're about to make another catastrophically poor decision?" "Both, maybe," Gideon admitted, rubbing a hand over his stubble. Morv let out a sound that could only be described as a mechanical groan. "Let me get this straight. You met a glowing mystery woman for all of 5 minutes, and now you're ready to throw caution, reason, and basic survival skills out the airlock? That's impressively reckless, even for you." "She wasn't just any woman," Gideon said, sitting forward in his chair. "She was different, special. I can't explain it, but I have to find her." "Oh, you have to," Morv said with mock gravity. "Well, why didn't you say so? Let's go ahead and ignore the fact that she's being hunted by armed mercenaries and probably doesn't want to be found. What could possibly go wrong?" Gideon grinned. "That's the spirit." The search began in the sprawling digital underbelly of the galaxy. Gideon spent hours combing through black market data networks and rumor boards, bribing shady information brokers with what little he could afford. The few leads he found were vague at best. Whispers of a glowing woman fleeing from system to system, always one step ahead of her pursuers. Meanwhile, the nebulous mule limped through space like a tired old hound. The coolant system was still malfunctioning, resulting in bursts of cold mist that filled the ship's corridors at random intervals. Gideon took to calling it free air conditioning, which Morv found less than amusing. "I've run a diagnostic," the AI said one morning as Gideon rummaged through a crate of spare parts. "And I've concluded that the ship's biggest malfunction is its captain." "Great," Gideon replied, tossing a wrench back into the crate. "Did the diagnostic also tell you where Liana went?" "Liana?" Morv echoed. "Is that what we're calling her now? How romantic. You're already on a first-name basis with someone you don't actually know." I heard one of the vendors at the bazaar mention her name, Gideon said defensively. And besides, it's not like I've got much else to go on. You've got nothing to go on, Morv corrected, except a strong desire to chase after trouble, which, for the record, is not a viable strategy. But Gideon was undeterred. Each passing day only strengthened his resolve and his obsession. It was on a dusty trade station orbiting the gas giant Silveris that Gideon finally caught a break. While negotiating with a particularly slimy information dealer, he overheard a pair of bounty hunters discussing their latest target. Glows like a plasma flare, one of them said, knocking back a shot of glowing blue liquor. Keeps slipping through our fingers, though. Damn slippery, these aliens. Gideon's heart leapt. He leaned casually against the bar, pretending not to eavesdrop as they continued their conversation. Last spotted on Circa 4, the other hunter said. Boss thinks she's heading for the outer veil, big bounty on her head, enough to retire in style. Circa 4, Gideon murmured to himself, filing the name away. You're really going to follow this trail, aren't you? Morv said in his ear as they left the station. Of course I am, Gideon replied. Because nothing says good idea like chasing a fugitive across hostile territory, the AI said. What's the plan if you actually find her? Offer her a cup of tea and ask her to explain why she's running for her life? Gideon grinned as he settled into the cockpit. Something like that. The Circa 4 was a desolate world, its surface a maze of jagged canyons and ash-covered plains. The atmosphere was breathable, but tinged with a metallic aftertaste that Gideon found unpleasant. After landing the nebulous mule in a secluded ravine, he set off on foot, his pulse pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Just so we're clear, Morv said through his earpiece, this is a terrible idea. You said that about my last idea, Gideon replied. And I was right, Morv shot back. But Gideon wasn't listening. He was focused on the faint trail of footprints in the ash, leading deeper into the canyon. As he followed the trail, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. And then he saw her. Liana was perched on a rocky ledge, her glow dim but unmistakable. She turned as he approached, her expression a mix of surprise and wariness. You again, she said, her voice carrying a note of exasperation. Me again, Gideon said with a grin, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. Miss me? Her lips twitched, as if suppressing a smile. You shouldn't be here. Probably not, he admitted, but I couldn't help myself. And for the first time in days, Gideon felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The jagged shadows of Circa 4's canyon walls seemed to press in as Gideon stood there, half grinning, half out of breath, staring at Liana. She perched on the rocky ledge like a bird ready to take flight, her luminous skin pulsing faintly in the dim light. You shouldn't have followed me, she said again, her tone sharper this time. Her swirling eyes darted past him, scanning the canyon like she expected trouble to erupt at any moment. Yeah, I've been hearing that a lot lately, Gideon replied, trying for nonchalance. He leaned against a nearby boulder, only for it to crumble slightly under his weight, leaving him scrambling to stay upright. Liana's lips twitched, but the amusement was fleeting. You don't understand what you're getting into. Probably not, Gideon admitted, dusting himself off. But I've been told I'm a quick learner. Well, except for the time I accidentally vented half my cargo into space. That took me a while to figure out. Liana sighed, her glow dimming like a fading ember. This isn't a joke. If they find you with me— I know, Gideon interrupted, holding up his hands. They'll shoot me, vaporize me, or throw me into one of those galactic prisons where the food is bad and the roommates are worse. Trust me, I've thought this through. Her eyes narrowed. And you still came after me? Well, yeah. He shrugged, as if the answer were obvious. I mean, you left before I could even ask your name properly. Not exactly fair, is it? She stared at him for a long moment, and Gideon had the distinct impression she was trying to decide whether he was brave, stupid, or some unholy combination of both. "It's Liana," she said finally, her tone softer. Gideon grinned. "Nice to officially meet you, Liana. I'm Gideon, but you probably already knew that, seeing as I'm the guy who disrupted an entire fruit stand for no reason other than sheer clumsiness." This time she did smile, briefly, but it was enough to make the desolate canyon feel a little less cold. The relative calm didn't last long. As they made their way through the canyon, Liana explained the basics of her predicament, though she was careful not to reveal too much. She was being hunted, that much was clear, but the why remained maddeningly vague. "Let me guess," Gideon said as they climbed over a pile of boulders. "You're a secret princess, heir to some lost alien dynasty, and these guys chasing you want to steal your crown." Liana arched an elegant brow. "That's your theory?" "Hey, I've heard crazier stories," Gideon replied, offering her a hand to help her up. She ignored it and climbed the rest of the way on her own, her movements effortlessly graceful. Besides, the glowing skin and mysterious aura kind of scream royalty. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm not a princess." "Well, that's a relief," Gideon said, dusting off his hands. "I don't think I'm cut out for palace intrigue. Too many forks at dinner, you know." Liana let out a soft huff that might have been a laugh, though she quickly masked it with a cough. They didn't have long to enjoy their banter. The distant hum of engines echoed through the canyon, faint but growing louder. "They're here," Liana said, her glow intensifying with alarm. Gideon's stomach tightened, but he forced a grin. "Well, that didn't take long. Do they have some kind of glowing woman radar, or are they just really persistent?" "Both, probably," Liana muttered. "We need to move. Now." And the chase was both exhilarating and utterly ridiculous. Gideon found himself sprinting through the maze-like canyon, dodging laser blasts that scorched the rocks around them. Liana led the way, her movements impossibly fluid, while Gideon stumbled along behind her, muttering a steady stream of complaints. "Next time," he gasped, ducking under a low-hanging ledge. "Remind me to wear better shoes for this." "Next time," Liana shot back, her voice tinged with exasperation. "Remind me not to let you follow me." They rounded a corner and found themselves face to face with a squad of mercenaries, their weapons trained on the pair. "Well, this is awkward," Gideon said, raising his hands. Before the mercenaries could react, Liana extended a hand, and the air around them shimmered with a strange, otherworldly energy. The ground beneath the mercenaries erupted in a burst of light, sending them sprawling. "Okay, that was cool," Gideon said as they ran past the dazed attackers. "It's not supposed to be cool," Liana replied sharply. Sure, Gideon said, ducking another laser blast. "But you have to admit it's impressive. Do you do birthday parties, or is it strictly life-or-death situations?" They eventually found shelter in a hidden alcove, the narrow entrance concealed by a cluster of jagged rocks. Liana slumped against the wall, her glow flickering like a dying flame. "You okay?" Gideon asked, his tone unusually serious. She nodded, though her expression was strained. "Using my abilities takes a toll, I'll be fine." Gideon handed her a flask from his jacket. "Here, it's water, probably." Liana took a cautious sip and gave him a sidelong glance. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Helping me," she said, her voice quieter now. "You don't know me. You have nothing to gain from this." Gideon leaned back against the wall and let out a long breath. "Maybe I'm just a sucker for a good mystery. Or maybe—" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Maybe I just don't like the idea of you facing all this alone." Liana studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "Can't I be both?" Gideon said with a lopsided grin. Liana shook her head, but there was a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "Come on," she said, standing up. "We should keep moving." Gideon followed, his heart lighter than it had been in years. For better or worse, he was in this now, and he wasn't about to turn back. The nebulous mule shuddered as it broke through the atmosphere of Zandrath Station, a sprawling trade hub that orbited the molten planet of Trixis. Gideon gripped the controls tightly, muttering under his breath as the ship groaned in protest. "Relax," he told the console, as though it could hear him. "You've been through worse. Remember that time we got stuck in that ion storm? This is nothing." "You're talking to the ship again," Morv noted dryly, its voice crackling through the cockpit speakers. "Should I be concerned?" "Only if she starts talking back," Gideon quipped. "I resent that," Morv replied. "I'm far more articulate than this flying tin can." The ship bucked as Gideon guided it toward the station's docking bay. Beside him, Liana sat in silence, her glowing skin dimmed to a faint shimmer. She stared out the viewport, her expression unreadable. "You okay?" Gideon asked, glancing at her. She didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "I don't like crowded places." "Well, you're in luck," Gideon said. "Zandrath Station is only mostly overcrowded, and it smells terrible, which keeps some people away. You ever been in a place that smells like burned rubber and disappointment? It's kind of a niche experience." Liana's lips twitched, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The docking bay was as chaotic as Gideon remembered, a tangle of ships, cargo crates, and beings from every corner of the galaxy. The air was thick with the scent of engine grease and a faint undertone of something disturbingly fishy. "This place is a nightmare," Liana muttered as they stepped onto the station. "Oh, come on," Gideon said with mock cheerfulness. "It's got charm. Look at that guy over there. He's selling deep-fried asteroid chunks. Where else can you get cuisine like that?" "I'd rather not find out," Liana replied, her voice laced with dry humor. They made their way through the station, weaving between traders hawking everything from exotic spices to questionable weaponry. Gideon kept a casual eye on their surroundings, though his hand hovered near the blaster on his hip. He wasn't expecting trouble, but trouble seemed to have a habit of finding him lately. "Where are we going?" Liana asked, her tone more curious than impatient. "There's a guy I know here," Gideon said. "An information broker. If anyone knows who's hunting you and why, it's him." "And you trust him?" "Absolutely not," Gideon replied. "But he owes me a favor. Long story. Let's just say it involves a stolen hoverbike and an unfortunate misunderstanding about the concept of personal property." Liana arched a brow, but didn't press the matter. The information broker, a wiry alien named Kallax, operated out of a cluttered booth near the station's edge. His multifaceted eyes glittered as he spotted Gideon approaching. "Well, well," Kallax said, his voice a melodic trill. "If it isn't Gideon Wren. Still alive, I see. That's unexpected." "Good to see you too, Kallax," Gideon said, leaning against the counter. "I need information." Kallax's antennae twitched. "And I suppose you're here to collect on that favor I owe you?" "You got it," Gideon said with a grin. Kallax's gaze shifted to Liana, his eyes narrowing. "Interesting companion you've got there. Glowing skin, mysterious aura. She's the one, isn't she?" Liana stiffened, but Gideon placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "She's with me," he said firmly. "Now, what do you know?" Kallax tapped a clawed finger against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "Word on the street is that a group called the Vorath Syndicate is after her. Nasty bunch. Mercenaries, bounty hunters, you name it. They've been tearing through the outer veil looking for her." "Why?" Gideon asked. Kallax hesitated. "That part I don't know, but whatever it is, it's big. Big enough to put a hefty price on her head." Liana's glow dimmed further, and she turned away, her shoulders tense. "Hey," Gideon said softly, "we'll figure this out." Kallax cleared his throat. "If you're smart, you'll cut ties with her and disappear. The Vorath don't play around." "Good thing I'm not smart," Gideon replied, tossing a few credits onto the counter. Thanks for the info, Calyx. Try not to get yourself killed. Calyx chuckled. Likewise, my friend. Likewise. As they made their way back to the ship, Liana was uncharacteristically quiet. Penny for your thoughts? Gideon asked. She glanced at him, her swirling eyes filled with a mix of emotions he couldn't decipher. You should have listened to him. To Calyx, nah, he's paranoid. Comes with the job. He's right, Liana said, her voice barely above a whisper. Being near me puts you in danger. You don't even know why they're after me. And you do? Gideon asked gently. She hesitated, then shook her head. Not completely, but I know enough to realize this is bigger than you or me. Gideon stopped walking and turned to face her. Look, I'm not exactly a hero, okay? I'm just a guy with a ship and questionable judgment. But for whatever reason, I met you, and now you're stuck with me. So let's figure this out together, yeah? Liana stared at him, and for a moment, Gideon thought she might argue. But then she nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Together, she said softly. Gideon grinned. That's the spirit. Now, let's get back to the ship before someone tries to sell me another deep-fried asteroid chunk. Back on the nebulous mule, MORV greeted them with its usual blend of sarcasm and barely concealed concern. Ah, you're back, the AI said. And still in one piece. How disappointing. I had a bet with myself that you'd return missing at least one limb. Missed me, huh? Gideon said, collapsing into the pilot's seat. Like a hole in the hull, MORV replied. As the ship lifted off, Gideon felt a renewed sense of determination. The galaxy might be vast and dangerous, but he wasn't about to let that stop him. For better or worse, he and Liana were in this together. And Gideon had a feeling their adventure was just beginning. The nebulous mule hummed softly as it glided through the expanse of deep space, its patchwork hull reflecting the distant light of a blue-white star. Inside the cockpit, Gideon lounged in his pilot's seat, feet propped up on the console. Beside him, Liana sat stiffly, her gaze fixed on the swirling patterns of hyperspace. So, Gideon said, breaking the silence, on a scale of 1 to disastrous, how bad was that trip to Zandrath Station? Liana didn't look at him. It could have gone worse. High praise, Gideon replied with a grin. I'll take it. From the speaker above, MORV's voice crackled to life. Captain, I'm detecting an incoming vessel. It's on an intercept course. Gideon straightened, his casual demeanor evaporating. What kind of vessel? Unknown, MORV said. But it's fast, much faster than this flying scrapyard you call a ship. Hey, don't insult the mule, Gideon shot back, his hands flying over the controls. She's sensitive, you know. Not as sensitive as you'll be if this ship catches us, MORV quipped. Liana leaned forward, her expression tense. Is it them? Gideon glanced at her. The Vorath? Maybe. Or it could just be someone trying to sell us galactic insurance. Either way, I'm not sticking around to find out. He flipped a series of switches, and the mule surged forward, its engines roaring in protest. The pursuing ship was relentless, its sleek form cutting through space like a predator on the hunt. Gideon pushed the mule to its limits, weaving through asteroid fields and skimming the edges of a nebula. Any brilliant ideas? He asked, glancing at Liana. She hesitated, then said, There's a small moon nearby. If we can reach it, we might be able to hide. Gideon checked the navigation readout. You mean that moon? The one with the ominous red glow and the giant storm swirling over half of it? Yes. Great. I've always wanted to visit a death trap, Gideon muttered, steering the ship toward the moon. As they approached, the storm loomed larger, a churning mass of crimson and gold lightning that seemed almost alive. This is a terrible idea, MORV said. Noted, Gideon replied, gripping the controls tightly. The mule plunged into the storm, buffeted by powerful winds and flashes of energy. The ship groaned in protest, alarms blaring as the turbulence intensified. "Hold on!" Gideon shouted, as the ship lurched violently. "I am holding on," Leanna said, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests of her seat. "Good," Gideon said. "Now keep doing that, and try not to think about how much worse this could get." The storm finally spat them out into the relative calm of a deep canyon, its walls glowing faintly with bioluminescent moss. Gideon guided the mule into a narrow crevice, shutting down the engines to avoid detection. "Nice flying, Captain," Morv said. "I'll be sure to add this to your ever-growing list of near-death experiences." "Thanks, Morv," Gideon said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Your confidence in me is overwhelming." Leanna stood and moved to the viewport, her gaze scanning the canyon. "Do you think we lost them?" "For now," Gideon said, "but they're persistent. We'll need a plan." And the plan, as it turned out, involved waiting. Gideon sat at the small dining table in the mule's cramped galley, tinkering with a broken holo projector. Leanna sat across from him, her expression thoughtful as she studied a map of the surrounding sector. "So," Gideon said after a long silence, "what's the deal with the glowing thing? Is it like a fashion statement, or—" Leanna looked up, one eyebrow raised. "You're joking." "Only partially," Gideon said with a grin. "Seriously, though, is it something all your people do?" She hesitated, then said, "It's complicated." "Everything about you is complicated," Gideon said, "but that's part of your charm." Leanna's lips twitched in a faint smile. "It's not a charm. It's a burden." "Well, I hate to break it to you," Gideon said, leaning back in his chair, "but you're stuck with it, and for what it's worth, I think it's pretty cool. I mean, you literally light up a room. Not many people can say that." Leanna shook her head, but the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease slightly. Their reprieve was short-lived. Morv interrupted their conversation with an urgent alert. "Captain, I'm detecting movement outside the ship. It appears we have company." Gideon grabbed his blaster and gestured for Leanna to stay back. He crept toward the airlock, his heart pounding. As he opened the hatch, he was greeted by a small, furry creature standing on its hind legs. It had large, luminous eyes and a mouthful of sharp teeth. "Well, hello there," Gideon said, lowering his weapon. The creature tilted its head, then let out a high-pitched chirp. "Great," Gideon muttered. "We've been found by a space raccoon." The creature chirped again, more insistently this time. It darted forward and bit the edge of Gideon's boot. "Hey, watch it!" Gideon yelped, shaking his foot. Leanna appeared behind him, her expression amused. "I think it likes you." "Yeah, well, the feeling's not mutual," Gideon grumbled, trying to nudge the creature away. The furry intruder scurried into the ship, disappearing into the galley. "Perfect," Gideon said. "We're being hunted by mercenaries, and now we've got a stowaway." Leanna smiled faintly. "Maybe it'll bring us luck." "Or rabies," Gideon muttered, though he couldn't help but smile as he followed her back inside. In the quiet moments that followed, Gideon found himself watching Leanna as she tinkered with the ship's navigation console. Despite the danger they were in, she seemed oddly at peace, her glow steady and calm. He didn't know what the future held, but for now, he was content to be here, with her in this crazy, unpredictable galaxy. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. The nebulous mule drifted in orbit above the moon, concealed by the remnants of the storm they'd narrowly escaped. The bioluminescent canyon below pulsed faintly, as though it had its own heartbeat, while the storm above crackled with arcs of crimson lightning. Gideon stood in the cockpit, staring at the readouts, his brow furrowed. "Tell me again why we're not leaving," Morv said, its tone a perfect blend of exasperation and sarcasm. "I thought the goal was survival, not sightseeing." "Because," Gideon said, glancing at the map Leanna had been studying earlier, "this moon might hold some answers. That, or it's just a giant death trap, which seems equally likely." Leanna entered the cockpit, her expression calm but her glowing skin slightly dimmer than usual. "You're worried," she observed. "Worried? Me?" Gideon flashed a grin. "Nah, just trying to figure out if this is the part of the adventure where we find treasure or get eaten by something with too many teeth." "Treasure, hopefully," Leanna replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But I suppose we'll find out soon enough." After some debate and a lot of grumbling from MORV, Gideon and Leanna prepared to explore the moon's surface. The storm had abated somewhat, though the air outside the ship crackled with residual energy. Gideon adjusted his suit's controls, sealing it against the planet's thin atmosphere. "All right," he said, glancing at Leanna. "Ready to take a stroll through the universe's creepiest canyon?" "I've been through worse," she said, her tone even. "That's both comforting and concerning," Gideon muttered, stepping out of the ship. And the canyon was even more surreal up close. The walls were covered in glowing moss that shifted colors as they walked, casting eerie patterns on the rocky ground. Strange, luminescent insects flitted through the air, their wings humming softly. "All right, this place officially wins for weirdest pit stop," Gideon said, glancing around. "It's like a rave designed by someone with a thing for alien fungi." Leanna chuckled softly. "It is unusual." Their laughter was cut short by a distant rumble. The ground beneath their feet vibrated, and a low, mournful sound echoed through the canyon. "Okay," Gideon said, drawing his blaster. "That's not ominous at all." Leanna's glow brightened slightly, a subtle reaction to her heightened awareness. "We should keep moving." "Agreed," Gideon said, "preferably away from the giant, scary noise." The source of the sound revealed itself as they rounded a bend in the canyon. A massive structure, partially buried in the rock, loomed before them. Its surface was sleek and metallic, covered in strange, glowing symbols that pulsed rhythmically. "What is that?" Gideon asked, his voice hushed. Leanna stared at the structure, her expression unreadable. "It's a vault. My people use them to store important things." "Important like what? Artifacts? Secrets? Old tax documents?" "Something far more dangerous," she said quietly. "Of course it is," Gideon muttered. "Why would it ever be something harmless?" As they approached the vault, the symbols glowed brighter, and a deep hum resonated through the air. Leanna raised her hand, and the symbols shifted, rearranging themselves into a pattern Gideon didn't recognize. "What are you doing?" he asked, taking a cautious step back. "Opening it," she said simply. "Opening it?" Gideon's voice rose slightly. "Is that a good idea? Because it doesn't feel like a good idea." Leanna didn't answer. The vault's surface shimmered, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a dark passageway. "Yep," Gideon said, shaking his head. "Definitely not a good idea." The interior of the vault was as alien as its exterior. The walls glowed faintly, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and dance. Strange machines lined the corridor, their purposes unclear. Gideon ran his hand over one of the machines, marveling at its intricate design. "You know," he said, "if I wasn't busy being terrified, I'd say this is pretty cool." "Focus," Leanna said, though there was a faint smile on her lips. They reached a large chamber at the end of the corridor. In its center stood a pedestal, atop which rested a small crystalline orb. The orb pulsed with a soft inner light, casting shifting patterns on the walls. "Let me guess," Gideon said, pointing at the orb. "That's the dangerous thing." "It's a fragment of my people's core energy," Leanna said, her voice reverent. "It's incredibly powerful and incredibly unstable." "Great," Gideon said. "Just what we need, a ticking time bomb." Leanna stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the orb. "I need to take it. If the Vorath find this, they'll use it to cause unimaginable destruction." "And if you take it, what happens to us?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Fantastic," Gideon said, running a hand through his hair. "All right, let's grab it and get out of here before something eats us. Or worse." As Liana reached for the orb, the chamber shuddered violently. The machines lining the walls sprang to life, emitting a high-pitched whine. Liana?" Gideon said, his voice rising. "I think you tripped something." The symbols on the walls shifted, forming an intricate pattern that Gideon couldn't decipher. The air grew heavy, and the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. "We've been found," Liana said, her glow intensifying. "Of course we have," Gideon said, raising his blaster, "because things weren't exciting enough already." The next few minutes were a blur of chaos. The Vorath mercenaries stormed the vault, their weapons blazing. Gideon and Liana fought back, using the terrain and the vault's strange technology to their advantage. "This is not how I imagined spending my day," Gideon shouted, ducking behind a console. "How did you imagine it?" Liana asked, her tone surprisingly calm as she deflected a blast with a makeshift shield of energy. "I don't know, maybe with fewer death threats and more snacks." Despite the odds, they managed to hold their ground. Liana's abilities, combined with Gideon's quick thinking, proved to be a formidable combination. When the last mercenary fell, Gideon leaned against the wall, panting. "Well," he said, "that was fun. Let's never do it again." Liana approached the orb, cradling it carefully in her hands. "We need to leave, now." "Agreed," Gideon said, pushing himself to his feet. As they fled the vault, the canyon seemed to close in around them, the storm above roaring to life once more. But despite the danger, Gideon couldn't help but feel a strange sense of exhilaration. For better or worse, he and Liana were in this together, and their adventure was far from over. The nebulous mule hurtled through the chaos of deep space, pursued by the Vorath mercenaries' sleek starships. Explosions lit the void as Gideon swerved the ship, narrowly dodging bursts of plasma fire. "Any chance they'll just get bored and leave us alone?" Gideon shouted over the blaring alarms. "Unlikely," Liana replied, her voice steady as she manipulated the crystalline orb in her hands, its glow intensifying. "The Vorath don't give up easily." "Great," Gideon muttered. "I always wanted to be chased by space thugs while babysitting a glowing doomsday device. Living the dream, really." MORV's voice cut through the chaos. "Captain, I've calculated a 12% chance of survival if we continue this trajectory. Would you like to hear the odds if we surrender?" "No!" Gideon snapped, his hands flying over the controls. "They're not much better," MORV added cheerfully. "Then why bring it up? Morale support." The mule suddenly shuddered as a plasma bolt grazed its hull, and the cockpit filled with a shower of sparks. "We're running out of options," Gideon said, his knuckles white on the controls. Liana's glow brightened, bathing the cockpit in an eerie light. "I can use the fragment," she said. "To do what?" "Bake them cookies?" Gideon asked. "To create a burst of energy that will disable their ships long enough for us to escape," she explained, her tone calm despite the chaos. "And how exactly does that work?" Liana hesitated. "It's not entirely safe." "Of course it's not," Gideon said, throwing his hands up. "Why would anything ever be safe or easy with you?" Liana moved to the center of the cockpit, the orb held tightly in her hands. Its light pulsed faster, almost as if it had a heartbeat of its own. "Brace yourself," she said quietly. "For what?" Gideon asked, a split second before a surge of energy erupted from the orb, flooding the cockpit with blinding light. The ship lurched violently, and the Vorath ships behind them veered off course, their systems overloaded by the blast. When the light finally faded, Gideon blinked, his vision slowly adjusting. "Is everyone alive?" "For now," MORV said. Liana lowered the orb, her glow dim and flickering. She looked exhausted, but there was a faint smile on her lips. "It worked." "Barely," Gideon said, scanning the readouts, "but I'm not complaining." The ship limped its way to a nearby starport, a hidden outpost nestled within an asteroid field. The station's rusted hull and dimly lit docking bay were a stark contrast to the vastness of space outside. As Gideon and Lyanna stepped onto the station's deck, they were greeted by a grizzled mechanic who looked like he hadn't seen a bath in years. "Welcome to Star Haven," the man said, his voice gravelly. "You break it, I'll fix it, for a price." "Charming place," Gideon said, glancing around. "What's your spa package like?" The mechanic grunted and walked away. Inside the station, Gideon and Lyanna found a quiet corner in a dimly lit cantina. The air was thick with the smell of burnt circuits and stale drinks, and the patrons were a mix of shady traders and bounty hunters. "Not exactly five-star accommodations," Gideon said, leaning back in his chair. "It's safe," Lyanna replied, sipping a cup of something that glowed faintly. "For now," Gideon said, his tone darkening. Lyanna set her cup down and looked at him, her expression softening. "Thank you." "For what? Crashing us into every mess possible?" "For staying," she said quietly. Gideon blinked, caught off guard by her sincerity. "Well, I'm not exactly the running type. Besides, someone's got to keep you out of trouble." Lyanna smiled, the faint glow returning to her skin. Later, in the quiet of the ship's galley, Gideon sat alone, staring at the stars through the viewport. He thought about everything they'd been through, the vault, the Vorath, the chase through the storm. He thought about Lyanna, her quiet strength and the weight she carried. Morv's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Captain, I've noticed a significant increase in your recklessness lately. Shall I update your psychological profile?" "Go ahead," Gideon said. "Put down hopelessly stubborn." "Noted," Morv said. "Anything else?" "Yeah," Gideon said softly, his gaze fixed on the stars. "Ad finally found something worth fighting for." The days turned into weeks as they traveled through uncharted space, searching for a safe place to hide the orb. Along the way, Gideon and Lyanna grew closer, their bond forged through shared danger and quiet moments of trust. Gideon found himself changing in ways he hadn't expected. He was no longer the aimless drifter he'd been when they first met. For the first time in a long time, he had a purpose, a reason to keep going. Lyanna, too, had changed. Her once guarded demeanor softened, and she began to trust Gideon in ways she never thought possible. Their journey ended on a distant, uninhabited planet, where they buried the orb deep within a crystalline cave. As they stood outside the cave, the twin suns casting long shadows across the rocky terrain, Gideon turned to Lyanna. "So, what now?" he asked. Lyanna smiled faintly. "Now we see where the stars take us. Together?" "Together," she said. Gideon grinned. "Well, as long as we don't run into any more glowing death traps, I'm in." Lyanna laughed, a soft musical sound that echoed across the quiet landscape. As they boarded the nebulous mule and lifted off, Gideon felt a sense of closure he hadn't known he needed. The galaxy was vast and uncertain, but for the first time he was ready to face whatever came next, with Lyanna by his side. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.